This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Vote counting begins in South Africa after voting comes to a close. The ICC warns parties in Libya against committing Rome Statute crimes. And partners in Mozambique step up their response to the cholera outbreak as the disease spreads. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, US President Donald Trump imposes fresh sanctions on Iran. And in sports, Tottenham Hotspur complete an astounding comeback to reach the UEFA Champions League final. We start the hour in South Africa, where the ruling ANC party has taken an early lead as vote counting gets underway. This comes a day after citizens cast their ballots in the 6th post-apartheid elections. Officials expect results to be announced by Saturday. The elections for a new parliament and 9 provincial legislators are seen by analysts as the toughest test yet for the ruling ANC party since it swept to power 25 years ago. President Cyril Ramaphosa recently acknowledged his government's failures and promised to address corruption, land laws and the revamping of the economy. Well, let's bring you the very latest now from South Africa. We're joined by CGTN's Angelo Coppola, who's in the capital, Pretoria, and Robert Nagila, who joins us from Durban. Angelo, let's start with you. Of course, voting wrapped up, and now the attention turns to Pretoria, the capital of the country, where vote counting is underway. Just give us an idea of the latest information coming from the Electoral Commission.
Well, as it stands right now, the IEC actually postponed one of their scheduled meetings at around an hour and a half ago because they were in meetings with political parties. It's understood that that has to do with some of the objections and some of the complaints that have been raised by the political parties last night after the voting booths closed, and we're not certain when the next scheduled voting session or briefing session is going to happen. As it stands right now, the room's starting to fill up. We see the numbers behind me on the wall. They are changing regularly. We've just had over 5 million votes cast at this stage. But the bottom line is there's going to be lots of argument, discussion and closed-door meetings between the political parties and the commissioners from the IEC and possibly some observer missions to get to the bottom of the complaints that have been raised and some of those objections that are going to be lodged. So at the moment, it's running fairly smoothly. Lots of officials, lots of government ministers wandering around, conducting interviews with all the media that are here. But it seems to be on track, but it could be like a duck with looking calm on the surface but paddling like hell underwater.
Of course, it's those objections that are raising a bit of a red flag. Let's turn to you, Robert Nagila, joining us from Durban. It seems it wasn't all smooth sailing across the country yesterday as voting took place. It's understood that the South African National Defence Force was actually deployed to parts of KwaZulu-Natal province as well as the Northwest province. Just talk us through their presence and how that may have hindered or helped voting, and whether or not there's any expectation of further trouble leading up to the results announcement.
Well, Lindy, you could say that their presence helped to smooth the process, allowing voters the confidence to go out and exercise their democratic rights. Now, as to whether we're likely to see more protests, disruptions when the results are announced, that's really hard to tell at this particular moment. Remember that a lot of these protests, disruptions were community-based over service delivery, lack of basic services. But we do believe that the security forces' presence will be maintained throughout this electioneering period. However, it remains very much an operation led by the police force, with the military acting as backup. At the moment, it's quiet, and I must say as well that some of those incidents of disruptions to this particular electoral process were few and far in between, but quite significant in some areas. Lindy?
Thanks so much, Robert. We'll come back to you in a moment. Angela, of course, you're standing now in that election results center. Can you give us an idea of how the numbers are looking so far? Of course, a lot of people paying attention to the ANC, saying this is going to be their most tightly contested election. How are they faring thus far?
Lindy, we've just cracked the 5 million vote number, I think, if I'm looking at the numbers behind me. The ANC are sitting at a little over 2.7 million. The DA are around 1.2 million. The EFF, which is the Economic Freedom Fighters, are just over 430 to 440,000. And then the Freedom Front Plus, surprisingly, on 145,000 votes. IFP, finally, is at 85,000 votes. But it's only about 27% of the votes that have been counted. And for a political party to get a seat in the National Assembly, they need between 37 and 50,000 votes once the vote tally has been tallied or counted up. So, or 0.25% of the total vote number. So it's touch and go for some of the parties. The smaller parties, of course, there are 43 of them, and they're fighting for around 10 to 12% of the vote. The other lion's share of the votes are going to those top 5 parties. So it's early days. It's basically almost 18 hours since voting or counting started. We're going to probably see some stuff happening between now and Saturday, and it's unclear what's going to happen, whether we're going to hear the final results on Saturday or not, Lindy.
Yeah, indeed. There's indeed quite a lot of things at this point in the unknown bracket. Robert, let's come back to you. We know, of course, some of the key issues that were raised during the campaign period was voters' concerns over jobs, crime, corruption, poor public services. In your view, and from the people you've spoken to and the election results coming out in KZN, how is the governing African National Congress expected to tackle some of these issues? Is there still a degree of confidence that they can indeed address some of these core issues?
Well, Lindy, speaking of things in the non-bracket, this is one of them. I'm afraid the only people who can actually answer that question is the ANC themselves. Now, it is projected they will win this particular race. However, when they come in, they have a full in-tray. We're talking about the economy. We're talking about unemployment, inequalities, land reform. It's just so much that they need to deal with at this particular moment. Now, you will recall about 4 or 5 days ago, that was last Sunday in Johannesburg during the ANC's last rally, President Cyril Ramaphosa admitting to his supporters and the country at large that yes, the ANC had made mistakes in the past as far as managing the economy, corruption and various other issues, but also stressing that the ANC was the best placed party to sort out and tackle these issues. So it remains to be seen how that will be done. Add on to that, Lindy, you've got the municipalities. A lot of the municipalities in this country are outweighed by the problems they're facing at this particular moment. There's a system in place. However, that system is not functioning. That's one of the reasons why we have issues here in Durban itself, where we have local authority workers also on strike at this moment, fighting for their welfare. There's a lot of people around this country that you talk to, and they will tell you that, look, we're just not receiving basic services. Service delivery is almost nil. That's one of the reasons why we saw those disruptions to the electoral process in some parts of KwaZulu-Natal. So I'm afraid the government, the incoming ANC, will have to decide how to approach these issues. Lindy?
Absolutely. And Angela, very quickly coming back to you, just as far as the Constitution is concerned, when should the final results be released?
Lindy, the Constitution doesn't play out in this scenario. This now falls to the Electoral Commission and the Electoral Voting Act, and there's no timeline set or deadline set for when they have to release those results. Bottom line is, though, as I said, there are those objections. We might see the Electoral Court come into play here. There might be a delay. We don't actually know how this is going to play out. And until the IEC has that briefing later today, we're not sure what time that's going to happen, we're not going to have a clear picture of when those results will be released, at least the final results, because the board behind me will keep on ticking over until all the votes are in. But until the IEC declares that the vote is final and these are the winning percentages, we don't have a very good idea. It's expected on Saturday by tradition, but it's not in the timeline and it's not in the Electoral Act either. So we'll have to wait and see how this one plays out, Lindy.
Indeed we shall. Thank you so much. Angela Coppola joining us there from the Election Results Centre in Pretoria, and Robert Nagila with us there from the city of Durban. Now, indeed, residents of South Africa's oldest township, Alexandra, turned up to make their mark, and that's despite threats to boycott the national poll. The township was brought to a standstill in the weeks leading up to the country's 6th democratic election. Residents raised their voices around their unhappiness regards to service delivery and escalating crime in the area. CGTN's Julie Shire was out and about on the streets of Alexandra.
Residents in Alexandra came out in their numbers to vote. Some young South Africans were barely 5 years old when the first democratic election took place in 1994. They're now making their mark in the nation's history.
Voting is a right, and by coming here it means like I'm ensuring our country's future in better ways. And I've seen during the few months we have seen how Alex has been. We've been struggling with service delivery, protests all over the place.
Close to 60% of the country's youth do not have jobs. They want change and a more promising future.
We should look at a party that represents an ordinary young South African, given the fact that we've got a high rate of unemployment, high rate of crime, lack of education, So looking at it, we should vote for a party that's going to represent all of those things and tick all the boxes.
All the empty promises from the previous government, firstly it was ANC, then DA in Alexander, they're all full of empty promises. So I'm hoping for whichever wins the votes, they're going to change the future.
Residents of South Africa's oldest township took to the streets just weeks before the election over inhumane living conditions, worsening crime and poor service delivery.
They must care about us, people first, so that we can vote for them every time. And then we don't complain if we've got things they promise us.
I hope Alexander must be clean, and then there must be no nyaupe and stop crying. The crime must be stopped. We're sick and tired. We all, you see, I'm too scared to stay alone in my house. I must always lock the door.
Can this particular 6th administration, we hope that it's going to prioritize young people in particular, and also it's going to prioritize women, because we believe that South Africa can take a leading step in towards this transformation agenda.
Thousands of Alexandra residents live in squalor and poverty, and this is the most powerful tool they have to speak to their leaders and demand change. Julie Shara, CGTN, Alexandra Township, South Africa.
Let's turn now to news from North Africa. The International Criminal Court is warning parties involved in the Libyan conflict to desist from targeting civilians or face the risk of being charged under the Rome Statute. Addressing the United Nations Security Council, Chief Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda called on commanders to ensure that their subordinates play by the rules. Here's more on that.
As the battle for Tripoli continues, deaths of both combatants and civilians are rising. More and more people are leaving the city in their quest to escape the turmoil. Amidst the twists and turns, the International Criminal Court is watching the unfolding situation.
My office stands ready to investigate and, where appropriate, to prosecute any persons party to the ongoing armed conflict should they engage in conduct constituting a crime within the jurisdiction of the ICC.
According to Chief Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda, commanders of both armies and militias supporting them will not be spared if their juniors violate rules of engagement.
Where a commander knew or should have known that their subordinates were committing or about to commit crimes and failed to take all necessary and reasonable measures within his or her power to prevent or repress such crimes, the commander may be held criminally responsible.
The
government of the National Accord, the only legitimate government established based on the Shkirat Agreement, hopes that the Council will place the situation in Libya at the top of its priority list through continuous coordination with the Special Representative of the Secretary-General, Mr. Gassam Salame, to achieve peace, security and overcome the current impasse.
She's also expressed her frustrations at the failure to apprehend the late Muammar Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, together with his co-accused, whose arrest warrants are yet to be effected. The three are wanted by the court over war crimes allegedly committed during the 2011 uprising that toppled Gaddafi.
The status quo is not sustainable. Impunity for atrocity crimes is hardly conducive to bringing peace and stability to this war-torn country. I take this opportunity to renew my call for state cooperation with the arrest and transfer of ICC suspects, and ask this Council to lend its support by taking a clear and vocal position in support.
Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar is leading an armed campaign to oust Western-based government of Fayez al-Sarraj. Calls for a ceasefire have been ignored by both. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
Meanwhile, the stalemate continues between General Khalifa Haftar's eastern forces and those of the UN-backed government. Frontlines remain fluid, and as fighting draws nearer to Tripoli city centre, more civilians are likely to get caught up in the crossfire. The World Health Organization has also warned of outbreaks of deadly diseases, including cholera. CGTN's Brian Toussaint has more.
The battle for Tripoli has been ongoing for 1 month now. Armed with more sophisticated weaponry, neither side is gaining ground over the other overall. 60,000 people have fled from the southern outskirts of the capital since the assault began by Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar's forces on the internationally recognized government. Many are in makeshift refuges, adding to the city center's nearly 500,000 population.
At the moment, even if the numbers are not that high, in the coming weeks these numbers will exponentially increase. The fighting is closing down towards the center of or the more populated areas in Tripoli, where then there is a highly likelihood that more and more civilians will be trapped into the crossfire.
So far, over 440 people have been killed and at least 2,000 injured. However, violence is not the only problem that civilians may face in the months ahead.
These supplies can cater for 3 to 4 weeks or a month. But if there is no ceasefire and there is no reduction in the scale and scope and intensity of the conflict, even if it goes by the current intensity, these supplies will run out of. We will run out of these supplies.
With summer around the corner, those in temporary shelters will be more susceptible to diseases. Crowding, food and water contamination, as well as poor sanitation, will all play their part.
Well, we are fearful, obviously, of acute watery diseases. May be very rare, but there is a likelihood now of cholera, for example, in these IDP dwellings because the water sanitation is compromised.
Other waterborne diseases like enteric fever also pose a threat. Tuberculosis regularly occurs within the migrant population. Last year, there was a major measles outbreak in Libya, which could surface again. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Well, let's bring you more on this. We're joined by CGTN's Adel Al-Makhraoui. He joins us, of course, from Cairo. Adel, a month of fighting, and it seems there's no sight of either of the factions backing down at this point. Just give us the latest from Tripoli.
Well, what is going on in the ground is basically a continuation of the offensive that General Khalifa Haftar, the Eastern General, and his LNA forces are continuing to take over the Libyan capital, Tripoli. Clashes are ongoing on daily basis. Airstrikes reported in Tripoli and surrounding on its outskirts almost every night. And the number of casualties are increasing. In recent weeks, at least 50 persons have been killed every week. So the number of casualties are growing, and in some reports the machinery and arms used are getting more sophisticated, which are all indicating that soon as the fighting intensifies even further, the casualties could tremendously rise.
And of course, there's major concern about civilian casualties, even a warning now from the International Criminal Court saying that the warring parties could be in contravention of the Rome Statute. Do you think either of them will respond to this warning from the ICC?
Not at all. It doesn't appear to be that there was going to be any response. Who seems to have an upper hand now is basically the Eastern forces, General Khalifa Haftar. If he stands down, then the forces supporting the government of national accord, supported by the UN, will step down, because currently they are in a defending phase. They're not attacking, they're not crossing over into territories that was previously controlled by the Eastern government. It's the other way around. So as long as Haftar is determined to proceed to take over Tripoli and what he is describing as a war against terrorist organizations in Tripoli, then the forces, the Islamic forces, the Islamic militias, and the forces that are allies to the government of national accord, they will keep on responding back and trying to defend their territories. And from what has been evident in the past few days, none of both parties are willing to take a step down, to put his arms down, even during the holy month of Ramadan, which the UN previously has been trying to push at least a ceasefire during this holy month where Muslims are fasting.
Well, of course, Khalifa Haftar's advance is leaving a trail of destruction in its path. And of course, in addition to that, also a humanitarian crisis. We understand that disease is now a major concern. Tell us more about the threat of an outbreak of diseases like cholera in Libya.
Well, it is very likely, because with the continuation of the war, especially with the airstrikes that are going on daily basis, it means that there is no room for the eastern or Tripoli's infrastructure maintenance to continue and proceed. There is challenge to keep on getting aid and regular supplies to the capital, and this means that the maintenance for water supplies, the cleansing opportunity, the sewers infrastructure, all are getting worse, and in terms this will only translate into more disease. We've seen that in Yemen, and Yemen has been reporting quite an outrageous rates in cholera and tuberculosis and other diseases. So there are fears, and this is actually why the UN has raised this alarm, that after what we've seen in Yemen, there is a possibility that this could be replicated in Tripoli, especially as the war intensifies and the attacks around the capital goes further. It will become even worse, and the situation will deteriorate once Haftar succeeds to isolate and surround the capital, which is so far is his main challenge and his main mission as well. But it is also the main task that the GNA forces have been trying to, is to maintain that they have access, road access to Tunisia at least, so that when the air transportation is down, they can have ground access and supplies coming in from Tunisia.
The collateral damage from this conflict seems to be piling up. Thank you so much, Adel Al-Makhraoui, for bringing us up to speed. All right, let's take a short break now. Here's what's still ahead on the program. South Sudan's president says the formation of a unity government should be delayed by a year. And Nigeria's tribunal begins discussions on legal challenges filed by the main opposition.
There's a murder every hour, jackings like every 10-15 minutes.
It's slowly but surely that we are losing this battle.
Yeah, they shoot every minute of the day.
We will keep on fighting. We're not going to give up.
Too many young people are dying on our streets.
Where's it going to stop? When is the killings going to stop?
Why don't we join hands with the police?
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The president of South Sudan has said the formation of a unity government should be delayed by at least a year. This despite a May 12th deadline in a September peace agreement. Following talks in Ethiopia, President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar said the parties have struggled to disarm, house and integrate the various warring forces since the deal. Salva Kiir also opposed an earlier suggestion by former rebel leader Riek Machar that the new government be formed in 6 months. The September agreement has held so far despite a string of failed peace deals and both parties missing key deadlines. Right, let's get you the latest now from Juba. We're joined on the line by CGTN's Patrick Oyet. Patrick, another extension. Just talk us through why the president is extending this formation of a unity government from 6 months to a year.
Yes, Lindy, the statement by President Salva Kiir, of course, is a contradiction of what his government last week was saying, as you rightly pointed out, because just last week, the government of President Salva Kiir was opposing the idea of even postponing or extending the formation of the government by 6 more months when other opposition groups asked for, especially Riek Machar. And this is because when they were pushing for the formation of the government to take place this month, the understanding was that the government would be formed without the security sector reform. So it would be formed the way things are today. Now that 6 more months have been added to the pre-interim period, it is clear that opposition groups, those led by Riek Machar and others, are not willing to return to Juba as long as the security sector reform is not done. And that therefore brings into reality of the security sector reform in South Sudan, which is a very new thing. It means putting all opposition armed groups in camps, providing them training, providing food, medicine, water, plus other basic services, retrenching the old armed people, disabled soldiers, sending child soldiers back home, uniting the army, doing a joint kind of deployment. And this is only for the army. Then you come to the police, you come to the National Security Service. You need to do all these kind of things. And to add to that, the problem now is that rainy season is beginning in South Sudan. So when you're setting up camps, when you need to move food to the soldiers that you're bringing to the camp and other logistics, it is very difficult because the roads are bad, impassable, and therefore logistically it becomes very difficult. Another problem is the problem of money. Yes, the government has committed now $100 million. They say they would provide for the security sector reform, but the budget for the security sector reform is talking of $300 million. So there is also no money. So all these factors play into the fact that time, 6 months, might not actually be enough because the government was previously saying they were going to form the government in May, of course considering that the security sector was going to remain as it is. But now if it is supposed to be reformed, then a lot of things need to be done in order for the security sector to get to place and to let those of Riek Machar come to Juba and the government be formed. Yes, Lindy.
Well, indeed, some complex challenges on the road to the formation of a unity government. Thanks very much. That was Patrick Oyet on the line with us from Juba. Staying with this story, let's now go to Ethiopia. Of course, as we know, that country has played a very important role in trying to broker a peace deal and lead the two sides towards a unity government. Let's go to Addis Ababa now, where CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi joins us with more on this story. Coletta, IGAD, of course, as we know, brokered this 6-month extension for the formation of a unity government as part of that peace deal signed in September. So how have they reacted to the president's announcement to extend this by a year?
Well, Lindy, we have seen a reaction through the communique that IGAD has given. Remember, the Council of Ministers of IGAD met on 7th of this month in Juba to discuss and endorse the 6 months proposition that was given by the warring factions when they met here in Addis Ababa. And the first communique that came out right after their meeting said the 6 months proposition was non-renewable. But a communique that has been given today to media houses has removed the word non-renewable. And that means IGAD is leaving a window open. And also IGAD has said with every 2 months, they'll make sure there's a review process to assess how much the parties have done in terms of putting in special security arrangements to ensure the government of national unity comes into force. And IGAD is planning that within these 6 months that of the extension, there will be Council of Ministers meeting and a summit. So we are thinking probably when the summit meets or the Council of Ministers meets within these 6 months, maybe they will take into account President Salva Kiir's proposition.
So regular monitoring then of bringing this deal to fruition. But talk us through IGAD's concern of developments on the ground at South Sudan. Of course, we're hearing from Patrick Oyet that issues like security remain a major problem.
Well, IGAD is very concerned because there is a delay. The more the transitional government of national unity delays, the more the return of certainty and in terms of peace also delays. And that is a problem for IGAD because they want the warring factions to come together and start working towards peace because it's going to be a process. So IGAD is concerned that over 1 million people still remain internally displaced within South Sudan. IGAD is concerned that thousands others remain refugees and remain quite uncertain in neighboring countries like Ethiopia, Sudan, and Uganda. And IGAD is also concerned that the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Committee is reporting that there's continued sexually gender-based violence within South Sudan. There are issues of violence brought up by military that has not been cantoned, military that cannot be controlled. So there is a lot of lack of control within South Sudan, which IGAD says if this continues, then return of peace to South Sudan will remain just a push and pull factor.
Indeed, that uncertainty being the biggest problem. Thank you so much, Coletta Wanjohi, joining us there live from Addis Ababa. Now, turning to news from Mozambique, the number of diagnosed cholera cases in the northern province of Cabo Delgado is steadily increasing. Humanitarian agencies are mobilizing resources as fast as they can to respond to the outbreak in that northern province. Our reporter, Daniel Arab Moy, is in Pemba, Mozambique. He filed this report.
At least 64 cases of cholera have been reported in the port town of Pemba, with the number expected to rise in the coming days. Assessments by humanitarian organizations indicate that many people in the affected districts are drinking water from unprotected sources, further exposing them to cholera and other waterborne diseases.
We know that we have cholera already here in Cabo Delgado, so it's a huge priority for us to avoid the spread of the disease and other diseases related to water.
Isabwana is one among hundreds of families in Pemba who are struggling to find clean drinking water, which is not readily available at the moment.
We live in constant fear of cholera, but there's nothing much we can do. Water here is a big problem, so we try to boil the dirty water before drinking it.
Cyclone ravaged island of Matembo is reported to have lost all its 4 water points, leaving residents with no clean drinking water. Sustained rains caused by Cyclone Kenneth have led to the destruction of sanitation facilities as well as the contamination of most sources of drinking water. Mozambique government officials say the situation remains dire and that there is need to move in fast if the country is to avert the current cholera outbreak.
The health sector is in coordination with the WHO. They are working not WHO as its own, but the cluster, the health cluster. They are working on a strategy to stop this.
Authorities are continuing to mobilize hygiene kits and sanitation supplies to help the affected districts. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Pemba, Mozambique.
Let's go to Nigeria now. An elections tribunal has formally begun to hear petitions challenging the outcome of February's presidential election. Nigeria's Electoral Commission declared incumbent President Muhammadu Buhari the winner, but his closest challenger and candidate of the main opposition party, Atiku Abubakar, is claiming the election was rigged. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam has more.
A courtroom packed with lawyers at the inaugural sitting of the Presidential Election Petitions Tribunal. 3 other presidential candidates have joined the main opposition People's Democratic Party candidate in challenging the victory of President Muhammadu Buhari. Nigeria's Electoral Commission declared Buhari winner after polling more than 15 million votes. His main rival, Atiku Abubakar, garnered more than 11 million votes, but he disagrees with the results collated by the Commission. The petitioners want the result of the elections overturned on account of widespread election violence, multiple electronic card reader failure, and late delivery of polling materials in some areas. The main opposition candidate, Atiku Abubakar, also filed as evidence results he claims to have obtained from INEC servers. The results he submitted put him in the lead ahead of President Muhammadu Buhari with millions of votes, but the Electoral Commission denies using its servers to tally the election results. The petition has been a matter of public debate, but now the court is barring all parties from making any public comments on court proceedings.
These proceedings should be treated as with any other low-profile case, where proceedings in court are not discussed publicly until a decision is pronounced by the court. This admonition is also extended to the parties, their respective counsels, and the members of the press. We on our part will make relevant information available as at when due. Any breach will not be condoned, and we will not hesitate in taking necessary action against such offenders.
Preliminary petition hearing will resume on May the 15th. From then, the court will have to progress rapidly, pouring through stacks of evidence and listening to hundreds of witnesses. The petitioners alone claim they have 400 to be heard. It's a tall order, but the case must be disposed before May the 29th, when a new president must be sworn into office. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Time for a short break. Coming up in your business news. US President Donald Trump imposes fresh sanctions on Iran. And AngloGold plans to dispose of its remaining assets in South Africa.
One continent, 47 countries, diverse civilizations. China's first conference on Dialogue of Asian Civilizations is a chance to promote mutual learning among countries and discuss Asian models of governance. What is Asia's global influence? Will differences lead to clashes or an Asian community with a shared future? How can we protect the diversity of Asia? Stay tuned to CGTN as we explore Asia's foods, religions, philosophies and relics and engage in constructive dialogue of civilizations. Africa Live. Find your voice.
US President Donald Trump has announced new sanctions on Iran targeting its metal industry. The new sanctions will affect Iran's steel, iron, aluminium and copper sectors. The announcement came just hours after Iran said it would stop complying with certain parts of the 2015 nuclear agreement. The fresh sanctions also came on the one-year anniversary of Trump's decision to withdraw the US from that nuclear deal. On Wednesday, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said Tehran would begin building its stockpiles of low-enriched uranium. He added that he would wait 60 days to take further action if world powers fail to negotiate new terms for the nuclear deal.
Iran is saying enough is enough. After fully complying with the nuclear deal, known officially as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, was abandoned by Washington a year ago, it is taking steps towards renewing the production of nuclear fuel.
We are announcing a reduction of our obligations under the JCPOA. We are not leaving the JCPOA.
While not abandoning the deal, Iran is stopping sales of its stockpiles of uranium and says it will start enriching uranium again in 2 months unless the remaining signatories of the deal step up to their commitments. Those nations, the UK, France, Germany, Russia and China, want to do so, but Washington's threat of sanctions against those that buy any Iranian oil or do business with Iran has had a chilling effect on their trade with Tehran. As well as economic sanctions, Washington is stepping up military threats too, dispatching an aircraft carrier to the Persian Gulf, following what Washington called threats to US forces in the Middle East. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo cancelled a visit to Germany and headed to Iraq Tuesday, warning against any attacks on US interests there. Then he headed to London, where he said he will wait and see what Iran actually does.
They've made a number of statements about actions they threatened to do in order to get the world to jump. We'll see what they actually do. The United States will wait to observe that.
Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif was in Moscow to meet his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov. Russia stressed the need to keep the nuclear deal in place and criticized Washington's show of force.
The United States' intention to send its aircraft carrier to the Persian Gulf and in general to strengthen its military presence there, alluding to their readiness to use force. Unfortunately, this has become a pattern of conduct of our American colleagues, be it in the Middle East or the Persian Gulf or Venezuela. This is all regrettable.
Iran's economy is suffering badly, and the early promise of the nuclear deal is fading, and fears of a confrontation between Washington and Iran are rising. And while Iran expressed its frustration that it's not getting the benefits of the nuclear deal, the US stepping up its maximum pressure campaign, announcing it's now going to sanction Iran's metals sector, aluminum, steel and copper, all targeted. While there had been offers of talks earlier in the Trump presidency, it looks like this campaign of pressure economically, diplomatically and militarily is set to continue. Nathan King, CGTN at the White House.
Well, staying with this nuclear deal, the remaining signatories of the agreement have reacted to Iran's decision. The British Foreign Secretary has urged Iran to stand by its commitments and not take any more steps to escalate the situation. At the same time, French Defense Minister has called on Iran to continue to respect all of its nuclear obligations. He says Iran might face more sanctions if it does not honor its part of the deal. Germany, on the other hand, also wants to keep the 2015 Iran nuclear deal alive. Its foreign ministry says its position is to stick by the agreement, calling it crucial for European security. Meanwhile, the Chinese foreign ministry spokesman says the agreement should be fully implemented and that all sides have a responsibility to ensure it happens. Right, global gold mining company AngloGold Ashanti is considering selling its South African business. The move is part of the world's third largest gold producer's plan to focus on assets that generate higher returns. The possible sale includes Mponeng Mine, AngloGold Ashanti's last underground mine in the country. The company says the process is at an early stage and may not ultimately result in any change of ownership to the South African business. The mining firm's CEO is refocusing AngloGold on longer life and lower cost operations. Exiting its South African operations could be a precursor to AngloGold moving its listing to London or Toronto. While still on mining matters, Barrick Gold Corporation says it may have to force an end to stalled talks with Tanzania over the fate of its subsidiary Acacia Mining. Acacia has been at odds with Tanzania's government since July 2017, when the state handed the London-listed gold producer a $190 billion tax bill, saying it falsely declared bullion exports. The Tanzanian government has since banned Acacia from exporting gold and copper concentrates from the country. The gold producer, which has been negotiating with the government on behalf of Acacia, reached a settlement proposal in February, but a final deal is yet to be agreed. Uganda's public debt may expand to 50.7% of its GDP as the nation borrows for infrastructure investment ahead of planned oil production. That's according to the IMF in its latest assessment of the country's economy. Uganda's debt climbed by 22% to about $12 billion in the fiscal year ending June 2018 as the country borrowed to build roads and hydroelectric dams. Its central bank has said the economy needs to expand by at least 7% a year in order to provide jobs as its young population enters the workplace. Uganda is expected to grow by 6.3% in the financial year starting July this year. Egypt's government has announced a number of deals signed with China during the latest Belt and Road Forum in Beijing. The two countries witnessed, or rather have witnessed, stronger ties over the last 4 years, with trade and investments more than doubling in that period. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has the story.
The summit in Beijing has provided support for Egypt's developmental plans. Both sides signed a $3 billion loan deal to fund infrastructure and real estate projects in the under-construction new capital in Egypt. China also plans to invest in renewable energy.
هو الاتفاق مع وزارة الإنتاج الحربي. An agreement was signed for a silicon factory to produce solar panels. It's going to be the first factory to produce all stages, starting from the sand preparation up to the final product here in Egypt. It's important because of the transfer of high technology components. Egypt is targeting renewable energy to cover 20 to 25% of its total energy resources in the next few years.
Telecommunications is another sector that witnessed bilateral cooperation through Huawei.
Huawei is going to launch the 5G service in Egypt during the African Cup of Nations in June. The company has also been assigned with the upgraded telecom infrastructure, starting with Cairo and the new administrative capital.
Chinese clothes manufacturer Handa has also signed up to establish a factory in Egypt. These deals come in the backdrop of the Belt and Road Initiative launched by President Xi Jinping to foster international trade and investments. The deals signed in Beijing are proof of the importance of the Belt and Road to Egypt, and that the summit in Beijing was not just about meetings, but about concrete results on the ground. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, time for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. A barber business in Ghana shaves off clients' waiting time with a mobile service.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
A Ghanaian company is disrupting hair grooming for Accra's men by shaving off precious minutes for their busy clients with home and office-based visits. Alexandra Majala has the details.
In Ghana's capital, Accra, Emmanuel Kojo Ankoma and his team have just arrived at a client's home where they are setting up a mobile barbershop. Ankoma is an entrepreneur who runs Shave Masters, a company that offers male grooming services in the city. Their strategic advantage is taking their services to their clients' doorsteps after appointments are booked.
2 years ago, I found myself in a barbering shop, waiting in a very long queue for my time. Then I wondered to myself, what if somebody came up with an idea where instead of going to the barbering shop, rather the barbering shop comes to you in any location? I discussed the idea with my wife, and bingo, she bought into it, and we decided to give it a try.
Ankoma started his outfit 2 years ago, and his services are not limited to home visits alone. Some of his clients call him to their offices. Shave Masters offers more than just routine hair trimming, it's also attracting young men wanting to sport the latest hairstyles. A basic cut goes for about $6, but can cost more if the client lives relatively far from the city center.
I chose Shave Masters because time is of the essence. I'm a very busy person with a very tight work schedule. And I do not like to spend several hours in the barbering salon waiting for my turn.
Ankoma's ambition is also growing by the day.
We'd want to first of all saturate the Ghanaian market, have a wider reach within Ghana. And when we have done a good job at that, we're looking at going to other African nations. If people in Ghana are busy and they need our service, trust me, there are other people out there that also need that. So watch us out.
The business has grown and now employs 3 barbers and a marketing officer. Ankoma gets most of his clients by word of mouth, but also markets his business on social media. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Coming up in your sports news up next.